She looked me in the eye and said, "Get out of my kitchen," in my own home. I waited for my son to defend me, to remind her who I was. Instead, he chose her. That moment did not just hurt. It broke something I did not even realize I was still holding on to. But what they did not know was this: I was not the woman they thought I was, and that one sentence would set everything in motion. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. My name is Evelyn Carter. I am 65 years old, and for most people in my neighborhood in Scottsdale, Arizona, I am just another quiet widow living out her retirement in a modest home with a small garden and a predictable routine. Every morning, I wake up just after sunrise, brew my coffee the same way I have for years, and sit by the kitchen window where the light comes in soft and steady. There is comfort in repetition, in knowing exactly how each day will unfold. At least, that is what I used to believe. My house is not large, but every corner of it holds a memory. The kitchen, especially, has always been the heart of it. I have cooked thousands of meals there, some simple, some meant for celebration, all made with care. The cabinets were chosen by me, the countertops installed after years of saving, and every dish inside them has a story attached. It is not just a kitchen, it is a record of my life. I have lived in this house for over 2 decades, ever since my husband passed away unexpectedly. Daniel, my son, was only a teenager at the time. Losing his father changed everything for both of us. I became not only his mother, but also his provider, his support, and his stability. There were years when I barely slept, when every decision carried weight, and when failure was not an option. I worked quietly, steadily, building something that allowed us to survive and eventually thrive. I never spoke much about it, even as it grew into something far bigger than I had imagined. I preferred it that way. I wanted Daniel to see me as his mother, not as a bank account. For a long time, that seemed enough. Daniel grew into a kind man, or at least I believed he did. He was never particularly strong-willed, always eager to please, always looking for approval. When he met Vanessa, I noticed immediately how different she was. She carried herself with confidence that bordered on control, the kind of presence that fills a room, whether invited or not. She was beautiful, polished, and sharp in ways that made people pay attention. I told myself that perhaps she would balance Daniel, give him direction. When they got married, I tried my best to welcome her into the family. I told myself that relationships take time, that not every bond forms instantly. Still, there was always a distance in the way she spoke to me, a politeness that felt more like obligation than warmth. I ignored it. I chose to believe in patience. 8 months after their wedding, Daniel came to me with a request. They were struggling financially, he explained, just for a little while. He said it would be temporary. I did not hesitate. I told him what any mother would say. This is your home. You can stay as long as you need. At the time, I believed I was offering help. I believed I was protecting my son. What I did not understand then was that I was also opening the door to something I was not prepared to face. Looking back now, I can see that there was a quiet shift from the very beginning. Small things, subtle changes, a tone, a glance, a silence where there should have been warmth. I felt it, deep down, but I chose not to name it. Love can make you ignore the very truths that might save you. And sometimes, the place you feel safest becomes the place where you slowly disappear. If you're still watching and already feel something is not quite right in this home, comment number 1 below to let me know you're with me. Now, let's move into what started to change everything. At first, the changes in my home were so small that they almost felt harmless. Vanessa began by rearranging things in the kitchen, moving utensils, replacing containers, and clearing out what she called unnecessary clutter. She did not ask me before doing it. One afternoon, I opened a cabinet and realized that several of my old spice jars were gone. They had been replaced with newer ones, neatly labeled, all matching in a way mine never had. When I asked about them, she simply said she had thrown them out because they were outdated. I told myself it was not a big deal. People have different preferences. Younger generations do things differently. That was the explanation I repeated to myself whenever something felt slightly off. But it did not stop there. Vanessa began making comments about the food I cooked. She said it was too heavy, too traditional, not aligned with what people ate now. She talked about nutrition trends and modern cooking methods as if everything I had done for decades was somehow wrong. I listened quietly, nodding when appropriate, even thanking her for the suggestions. It was easier that way, easier than confronting the discomfort building inside me. Daniel, meanwhile, stayed in the middle, or at least that is what he wanted me to believe. When Vanessa spoke, he rarely disagreed. When I looked at him for support, he would give me a small apologetic smile and say things like, "She is just trying to help." His words were gentle, but his silence carried more weight than anything he could have said. Meals changed. Conversation shifted. Vanessa's voice filled the room, confident and constant, while mine faded into the background. I began to notice how often I was interrupted, how rarely I was asked anything about my own day. It was not loud or obvious. It was subtle, like a slow dimming of light. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself families go through adjustments. I told myself that love meant being flexible. The morning everything changed began like any other. I woke early, made my coffee, and stepped into the kitchen to prepare breakfast. The routine grounded me. I moved through it without thinking, reaching for the same utensils, the same ingredients, following patterns that had been part of my life for years. I had just started cooking when I heard footsteps behind me. Vanessa entered the kitchen, her expression already tense. She looked around, then at me, as if something about the scene bothered her. She did not greet me. Instead, she said she had planned to cook that morning and that she needed the space. Her tone was not a request. It was firm, controlled, and dismissive. I paused, unsure how to respond, the spoon still in my hand. Then she said it. "Get out of my kitchen." For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood. The words did not seem real. They hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. I stood there, feeling something shift inside me, something I could not yet name. I turned to Daniel. He was leaning against the counter, watching the exchange unfold. Our eyes met, and for a brief second, I saw hesitation. I waited for him to say something, anything that would restore balance, that would remind both of us who I was in that space. He sighed instead. "Mom, just let her handle it." That was all. No defense, no correction, just a quiet dismissal wrapped in calm words. I do not remember putting the spoon down, but I remember walking out of the kitchen. Each step felt distant, as if I were watching myself from somewhere else. The house was the same, the walls unchanged, the furniture exactly where it had always been, and yet everything felt unfamiliar. The kitchen door remained open behind me. I could hear Vanessa moving around, the sound of cabinets opening, dishes shifting, the rhythm of someone taking ownership. And I realized, with a clarity that left no room for denial, that I had not been pushed out in a single moment. I had been stepping aside for a long time. That morning was simply the first time it became impossible to ignore. If that moment in the kitchen hit harder than you expected, comment number 2 below so I know you felt it too. Now, let's see what truth was hiding beneath the surface. The days after that morning in the kitchen passed in a strange, quiet tension. Nothing dramatic happened on the surface, yet everything felt different underneath. I moved through my own home carefully, as if I were a guest trying not to disturb anyone. Vanessa continued her routines as though nothing had changed, taking full control of the kitchen, the living room, even the way things were arranged in spaces I once knew by heart. Daniel avoided me more than usual. When we crossed paths, he kept his words short and his eyes elsewhere. We no longer sat down for meals together. Sometimes they ate before I came out of my room. Other times, I chose to eat alone, not because I preferred it, but because it felt easier than forcing conversation that no longer existed. The house, once filled with a quiet sense of belonging, had become a place where I felt increasingly unnecessary. It was on a Wednesday afternoon, just after I returned from a short walk, that my phone rang. I recognized the number immediately. It was my attorney, someone who had handled my legal and financial matters for years. He was not a man who called without reason. When I answered, his tone was different from anything I had heard before. It was measured, serious, and unusually direct. He asked if I was somewhere private, if I could speak freely. That alone was enough to make my chest tighten. He explained that his office had been contacted regarding a legal document submitted under my name. It was a request for a power of attorney, a document that would grant someone else the authority to manage my assets and financial decisions. The problem, he said, was that the signature on the document was not mine. For a moment, I did not understand what he was saying. The words seemed to exist without meaning, as if they belonged to someone else's story. I sat down slowly, trying to process what I was hearing. He continued, carefully laying out the details. The document named Daniel as the individual who would be given full control over my property and financial accounts. It had already been submitted for processing. If approved, it would allow him to make decisions on my behalf without my consent. My hand tightened around the phone. I asked him if there was any chance it was a mistake, some kind of administrative confusion. He answered immediately. There was no mistake. The signature had been forged. Silence filled the space between us for a few seconds, but it felt much longer. I could hear my own breathing, steady but shallow, as if my body was trying to remain calm while everything inside me shifted. Then he told me something else. After noticing the irregularity, he had done a preliminary check into Daniel's financial situation. The results were not good. Daniel and Vanessa were carrying over $300,000 in debt, credit cards, failed business ventures, loans taken to support a lifestyle they could not afford. They had already approached financial institutions, attempting to leverage my home as collateral. That was when the pieces began to fall into place. The comments about the house, the sudden interest in my assets, the subtle shift in how I was treated. It was not random. It was part of something deliberate. I felt something inside me break, but not in the way I expected. There were no tears, no immediate outburst of anger. Instead, there was a quiet, steady realization that settled deep in my chest. My son had not come to me for help. He had chosen deception. My attorney asked if I wanted to proceed with a formal complaint, to report the fraud and begin legal action immediately. His voice carried a sense of urgency, as if he believed time was critical. I closed my eyes for a moment before answering. No. The word surprised even me, but once it was spoken, I knew it was the right one. I told him I needed time. I asked him to secure everything, to ensure that no documents could move forward without direct verification from me. He agreed, though I could tell he did not fully understand my decision. After the call ended, I remained seated, staring at nothing in particular. I thought about Daniel as a child, about the years we had struggled and built a life together. I thought about every sacrifice, every moment I had chosen his well-being over my own. And I asked myself a question I had never considered before. When did he stop seeing me as a person and start seeing me as something he could use? That afternoon, something changed inside me. I was no longer confused. I was no longer in denial. I was watching now. If you're starting to see this story is deeper than just family tension, comment number 3 below to stay with me. Now, things are about to take a much darker turn. After that phone call, I did not confront them. I did not raise my voice or demand answers. Instead, I changed. From the outside, it may have looked like I had simply grown quieter, but what truly shifted was not my silence. It was my awareness. Every movement in the house, every conversation, every glance between Daniel and Vanessa began to stand out in ways I had never noticed before. It was as if I had been walking through my own life half asleep, and now I was finally awake. I stopped doing the things I had always done for them. I no longer prepared meals for everyone or cleaned up after them. I did not announce this change. I simply let it happen. When Vanessa left dishes in the sink, they stayed there. When Daniel asked casually if I was planning dinner, I answered that I had already eaten. There was no anger in my tone, no accusation, just a quiet refusal. At first, they did not understand. Then they became uncomfortable. The house felt different without my constant effort holding everything together. The small inconveniences began to pile up. I noticed the way Vanessa's patience thinned more quickly, the way Daniel's voice carried a hint of frustration when things did not run as smoothly as before. They were used to a system they had never acknowledged, and now that it was gone, they did not know how to replace it. I watched. Vanessa started leaving the house more often, always dressed carefully, always carrying her phone like it was something important. She spoke in low tones when she returned, stepping into corners of the house where she thought no one would hear. Daniel, on the other hand, grew more restless. He spent long hours staring at his laptop, occasionally running his hands through his hair in a way I remembered from his younger years when he felt overwhelmed. I did not ask questions. I listened instead. One afternoon, while passing through the hallway, I heard their voices from the living room. They were not speaking loudly, but there was tension in the way their words overlapped. Vanessa was impatient. I could hear it clearly. She was pushing for something to move faster, something that had already been set in motion. Daniel hesitated, his responses slower, less certain. For a brief moment, I thought I heard doubt in his voice, something fragile that could still be reasoned with. But it did not last. His tone shifted, becoming quieter, more resigned. Whatever hesitation he had, it was not enough to stop him. I continued walking as if I had heard nothing. That same day, I met with my attorney again. We reviewed everything in detail. He confirmed that safeguards had been placed on all my accounts and properties. No document could be processed without direct verification from me. Every possible vulnerability had been secured. It was a necessary step, but it was only the beginning. Then he mentioned something new. There had been inquiries from another legal office asking about procedures related to guardianship. The request was general, but the timing was not a coincidence. It aligned too closely with everything else that was happening. The realization settled slowly but firmly. They were not just trying to access my assets. They were preparing to prove that I was no longer capable of controlling them. If they succeeded, they would not need my permission for anything. My home, my finances, my decisions would all be placed in someone else's hands. I would become a legal formality in my own life. I thanked my attorney and left without showing what I was feeling. That night, I sat alone in the living room, the house unusually quiet around me. I looked at the walls, the furniture, the space I had built piece by piece over the years. Everything was still there, unchanged on the surface. But I understood now how close I was to losing it all, not because I had failed, but because I had trusted. I was no longer confused about what was happening. I was no longer waiting for things to improve on their own. I was preparing, and this time, I would not step aside. If you can feel the shift happening and know something big is coming, comment number 4 below. Now let's step into the moment where everything finally breaks. I never imagined that one day I would feel the need to watch my own home like a stranger looking in from the outside. But that was exactly what I did. A few days after my meeting with my attorney, I arranged to have security cameras installed in the common areas of the house. The explanation I gave was simple and believable. I said I wanted to feel safer, that I had heard about break-ins in nearby neighborhoods. Neither Daniel nor Vanessa questioned it. If anything, they seemed relieved that I was focusing on something other than them. The cameras were small and discreet, placed in the living room, the kitchen, and the hallway that connected the bedrooms. The technician showed me how to access the recordings from my phone. I nodded, thanked him, and waited until the house was quiet before I checked the footage for the first time. The first few nights revealed nothing unusual, just routine movements. Vanessa scrolling through her phone on the couch, Daniel pacing slowly while thinking about something I could not hear. It would have been easy to convince myself that I had overreacted, that perhaps I had misunderstood everything. But I knew better. It happened on a Thursday night. I was in my room, the lights turned off, the house silent except for the faint sounds of movement downstairs. I opened the application on my phone and began scrolling through the live feed. The image from the living room came into focus, and I saw them both sitting there. They were talking. At first, I could not make out the words clearly, but then I adjusted the volume. Their voices came through, low but sharp enough to understand. Vanessa was the one leading the conversation. Her tone carried urgency, the kind that comes from pressure building over time. She was no longer hiding her impatience. She spoke about timelines, about delays, about how they could not afford to wait any longer. Daniel sat across from her, leaning forward, his hands clasped together. He looked tired, worn down in a way I had never seen before. For a moment he hesitated. I could see it in the way his shoulders dropped, in the way he avoided her eyes. Then Vanessa said something that changed everything. She mentioned the doctor, not in a casual way, but with certainty. She said the arrangements were already being made, that there was someone willing to evaluate me and provide a statement if necessary. Her voice was calm, almost reassuring, as if she were discussing something entirely reasonable. My chest tightened. She went on to explain that once there was official confirmation that I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs, everything would fall into place. The process would be legal, clean, final. They would not need my consent. Daniel did not respond immediately. He looked down, his expression unreadable. For a brief moment, I thought he might say no. I thought that perhaps there was still something in him that would resist. But Vanessa kept talking, carefully, methodically, laying out their situation, the debts, the pressure, the lack of options. She framed it as necessity, not choice. Eventually, Daniel nodded. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. That was the moment something inside me went completely still. I did not cry. I did not feel the sharp sting of shock I might have expected. Instead, there was a quiet clarity that settled over me, steady and unshakable. The uncertainty was gone. The doubt had disappeared. There was no misunderstanding. There was no excuse. My son had agreed to a plan that would take away my home, my independence, and my voice, all under the protection of legal paperwork. I closed the application and set my phone down on the nightstand. The room around me felt unchanged, yet everything was different. I lay back and stared at the ceiling, replaying the conversation in my mind, not to relive the pain, but to remember every detail, every word, every pause, every decision. They believed they were being careful. They believed I did not know. That belief would be their greatest mistake. Because now, I was no longer reacting. I was preparing. And this time, I would be the one in control. That night, after I watched the recording, I did not sleep. I lay in bed with my eyes open, staring into the darkness, listening to the quiet sounds of the house that no longer felt like mine. There was a time when every corner of this place carried warmth, when it held the weight of memories built over years of effort and love. Now it felt different, not empty, but altered, as if something essential had been removed. I expected to feel anger, or grief, or even panic. Instead, what settled inside me was something far more unsettling: clarity, the kind that leaves no room for denial. I thought about Daniel as a child, about the way he used to reach for my hand without hesitation, trusting that I would always be there. I remembered the nights I stayed awake worrying about his future, the choices I made to ensure he would never feel the instability I had known. I had built everything with him in mind. And now, that same child had chosen to stand on the other side of a decision that would erase me. The realization should have broken me, but it did not. Instead, it forced me to see something I had avoided for too long. I had spent years believing that love meant enduring, that patience would eventually be rewarded, that silence could preserve peace. I had mistaken tolerance for strength. That understanding changed everything. I considered my options carefully. The most obvious path was to act immediately. I had enough information to involve the authorities, enough evidence to stop them before they could take another step. It would have been justified. It would have been quick, but it would not have been complete. If I moved too soon, they would retreat, deny, explain, reshape the truth into something smaller than it was. They would never fully face what they had chosen to do, and I would be left with fragments instead of certainty. I needed more than that. I needed the full picture, so I chose to wait. Not because I was afraid and not because I was unsure. I waited because I wanted control. I wanted to understand every part of their plan, every decision they were willing to make. I wanted there to be no space left for excuses. From that moment on, everything I did became intentional. I continued my routine, speaking when necessary, staying quiet when it served me. I allowed them to believe nothing had changed. Vanessa's tone softened slightly, her words more measured, as if she were testing a new approach. Daniel tried to engage me in small conversations, asking questions he had not asked in years. I answered politely, nothing more. I watched the way they moved through the house, the way their confidence returned when they believed they were not being observed. It was subtle, but it was there. They thought they were getting closer to what they wanted. They had no idea they were walking directly into what I was preparing. One morning, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and studied my reflection. The woman looking back at me was familiar, but not the same. There was something steadier in her gaze, something that had not been there before. I was no longer reacting. I was deciding. And for the first time in a long time, I understood that I did not have to accept the role they had given me. I could define my own. They believed they were in control of what would happen next. They were wrong. This time, the outcome would be mine. If you're still here and understand that this is no longer about emotion, but control, comment number 6 below. Now let's move into chapter 7, where everything is revealed. The invitation came 3 days before the dinner. Vanessa mentioned it casually, as if it were just another family gathering. Her tone carried a confidence I had not heard before, something almost celebratory beneath the surface. Daniel echoed her enthusiasm, though his voice lacked the same certainty. I agreed to attend without hesitation. They believed they were leading the situation. I knew otherwise. The house we arrived at that evening was larger than mine, but it felt less real. Everything about it seemed designed to impress rather than to comfort. As I stepped inside, I was greeted with polite smiles that did not quite reach the eyes of the people offering them. I had seen those expressions before. They were not new to me. I took my seat quietly, observing. Vanessa moved through the room with ease, her posture relaxed, her voice steady. She spoke to her family with a familiarity that suggested she already saw herself as someone who had succeeded. Daniel stayed close to her, nodding at the right moments, saying little but trying to appear composed. Dinner began with the usual conversation, stories, laughter, small remarks that carried no real weight. I listened without participating much, allowing the moment to unfold as it was meant to. Then gradually, the tone shifted. Vanessa's father leaned back in his chair and began speaking about responsibility, about making smart decisions for the future. His words were directed toward Daniel, but his eyes drifted toward me more than once. It did not take long for the subject to become clear. The house. He spoke as if the matter had already been settled, as if decisions had been made and agreed upon. There was an assumption in his voice, a certainty that did not belong to him. I let him finish. The room felt expectant, as though everyone was waiting for confirmation. Vanessa glanced at me briefly, then looked away, her expression controlled but tense. Daniel did not look at me at all. That was when I stood. I did not raise my voice. I did not rush my words. I simply spoke. I said that the house was mine, that it had always been mine, that no decision regarding it had been made without my knowledge, and none would be. The room grew quiet. I continued, explaining that I was aware of the documents that had been submitted under my name. I mentioned the attempt to establish legal control over my assets. I described it without emotion, as if I were outlining facts in a report. Daniel's head lifted then. For the first time that evening, he looked directly at me. The color had drained from his face. Vanessa's composure broke more quickly. Her posture shifted, her hands tightening around the edge of the table. She did not speak, but the change in her expression said enough. I reached into my bag and placed a folder on the table. Inside were copies of everything. The forged documents, the records of their attempts, the details they had believed were hidden. I did not need to explain further. Silence filled the room, heavy and complete. Then I said one more thing. I told them that I was not who they believed me to be, that the life they had judged so easily was only a fraction of the truth. I did not go into detail. I did not list numbers or accomplishments. I simply allowed the statement to exist. It was enough. The shift in the room was immediate. The confidence that had filled it earlier disappeared, replaced by uncertainty and something closer to fear. Vanessa looked at me as if she were seeing me for the first time. Daniel's expression held something deeper, not just shock, understanding. I looked at him for a moment, long enough for him to feel it. Then I sat back down. For years, I had allowed myself to be overlooked, to be reduced to something smaller than I was. I had believed that keeping peace required silence. That night proved otherwise, because for the first time in a long time, I was not the one being pushed aside. I was the one deciding what came next. When we returned home that night, the silence followed us inside like something heavy and unavoidable. No one spoke as the door closed behind us. The same walls stood around us, the same furniture in place, yet the house no longer felt like it had before. The illusion that had been quietly maintained for months had finally broken. Daniel stood near the entryway, unsure of what to do with himself. Vanessa moved further into the living room, her steps slower than usual, her confidence gone. For the first time since they moved in, neither of them seemed certain of their place. I did not wait for them to speak. I walked into the living room, set my bag down, and turned to face them. My voice, when I began, was calm and steady. There was no anger left in it, no raised emotion. What remained was clarity. I told them they had 2 weeks to move out. The words settled into the room without resistance. I did not need to repeat them. They understood. I explained that from this point forward, they would be responsible for their own living arrangements, their own expenses, and their own decisions. This house would no longer serve as their safety net, not after what they had attempted to do. Daniel's reaction came first. His shoulders dropped, his posture folding inward, as if the weight of everything had finally reached him. He looked at me, searching for something that was no longer there. I did not look away, but I did not soften either. Vanessa remained still, her expression tight, her thoughts clearly racing. She did not argue, not immediately. That silence said more than any defense she could have offered. I continued. I told them that I was aware of their financial situation in full detail. The debts, the failed decisions, the pressure they were under. I said that I would take care of those obligations, but not in a way that would return control to them. I would pay the creditors directly, ensuring that the burden was removed without giving them access to money they had already proven they could not manage. That was not generosity. It was structure. Then I told them about the final decision. All of my assets had been transferred into an irrevocable trust, a legal structure that could not be altered by them, accessed by them, or manipulated in any way. Their future connection to anything I owned would depend entirely on their actions from this point forward. The effect was immediate. Whatever remained of their expectations disappeared in that moment. There would be no shortcuts, no hidden opportunities, no second attempt at control, only consequences. Daniel lowered his head, his silence now heavier than before. Vanessa finally shifted, her composure cracking just enough to reveal the reality she had not prepared for. I did not add anything else. There was nothing left to explain. For the first time since they had entered my home, the balance had changed completely. I was no longer reacting to their decisions. I had defined the terms, and now they would have to live within them. If you've made it this far and can see how everything has changed, comment number 8 below. Now let's move into the final outcome of this story. Time has a way of settling things that once felt impossible to carry. It had been almost a year since that night, and the house had returned to something that resembled peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from everything being perfect, but the kind that comes from knowing exactly where you stand. The silence no longer felt heavy. It felt chosen. I moved through my days differently now. I spent more time outside, tending to the garden I had neglected for too long. I returned to my work not from behind the curtain as I had done for years, but openly. Decisions that I once delegated, I now handled directly. People who had only known me as a distant name began to know me as a presence. It was not a transformation, it was a return. Daniel and Vanessa had moved into a small apartment across town, It was nothing like the life they had tried to build before, but it was real. Daniel kept his job, and for the first time in a long while, seemed to take it seriously. There was a steadiness in him now, something that had been missing before. Vanessa changed too, though in quieter ways. She worked long hours in a role that required her to serve rather than lead. It did not suit the person she had once been, but over time, she adapted. The sharp edges of her confidence softened into something more grounded. We did not speak often at first. When Daniel called, his voice carried hesitation, as if he were unsure of how much space he was allowed to take. Our conversations were simple. He spoke about his work, his routines, the small details of a life he was learning to manage on his own. I listened. I responded when it felt right. Nothing was forced. One afternoon, Vanessa asked to meet me. We sat across from each other in a quiet place, the kind where no one pays attention to anyone else. She looked different, not weaker, but more aware. She spoke carefully, not to convince me of anything, but to acknowledge what had happened. There was no defense in her words, no attempt to reshape the past. I did not interrupt her. When she finished, I told her that change is not proven in a single conversation. It is shown over time. She nodded, as if she already understood that, and that was enough. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something closer to possibility. That night, I sat in my living room, the same space that had once felt like it was slipping away from me. Now it felt steady again, not because everything had returned to what it was, but because I had. Some things do not go back, but some things, when rebuilt, become stronger in ways you never expected. There are mornings now when I sit in my kitchen with a quiet I used to fear and realize that it no longer feels like loneliness. It feels like ownership, not just of the house, but of myself. For years, I believed that love meant endurance, that being a good mother meant giving more than I kept, staying silent when something hurt, and trusting that patience would eventually restore balance. I told myself that sacrifice was strength, that if I held everything together long enough, it would remain whole. I was wrong. What I held together was not a family. It was an illusion. Losing that illusion was not the tragedy I once imagined. It was the beginning of something far more honest. The truth was not gentle. It forced me to see what I had ignored, what I had excused, and what I had allowed. It showed me that love without boundaries is not love. It is permission. I still love my son. That has not changed, and I do not believe it ever will. But the way I love him has. It is no longer rooted in sacrifice alone. It is no longer blind. It stands beside something I had forgotten for too long. Respect. I have learned that family is not defined by closeness alone. It is defined by how we are treated within that closeness. No one earns the right to diminish you simply because they share your name, and no amount of history justifies losing yourself in the process. I made mistakes. I stayed quiet when I should have spoken. I stepped aside when I should have stood firm. But I don't regret the woman I was. She did what she believed was right with what she knew at the time. Now, I know more. I understand that my worth does not depend on how others see me. It never did. I understand that respect is not something given freely without limit. It is something that must be protected. Sometimes, the most painful moments are the ones that reveal the truth we need most. And sometimes, the life you rebuild after everything falls apart is the first one that truly belongs to you. My name is Evelyn Carter, and I am no longer invisible. In the end, life has a quiet way of revealing truths we once refused to see. Sometimes, what breaks us is not loss, but clarity. The kind that strips away illusion and leaves us standing face to face with who we are and what we deserve. It teaches us that love should never require us to disappear, and that respect is not something we beg for, but something we choose to uphold within ourselves. Growth does not come from comfort, but from the courage to face what is real and rebuild from it. And while not every story ends the way we once imagined, some endings offer something far more valuable than perfection. They offer peace, strength, and the freedom to finally live without pretending. If this story resonated with you, thank you for being here. Share your thoughts in the comments, and do not forget to follow and subscribe for more stories like this.